Alright, hey, it's your boy Pod Drew back to review another pair of films on Drewz Reviews. Today, I'm going to be talking about the new blockbuster Kong, Skull Island, and I'm going to be pairing that with another Creatures on an Island movie, The Island of Dr. Moreau from 1977. So, let's start with old Kong.
Well, would you look at that? It bleeds.
What?
We did that. We hook up with Chapman, there's enough munitions on that down sea stallion to finish the job.
I was excited to see this film based on the trailers, which I thought were very well done, with some of that late 60s music, Creedence Clearwater and all that. And I saw it from the trailers, obviously the cast was very impressive. And you know, giant monsters fighting each other, who doesn't like that from time to time? So, the film is set in the 70s at the tail end of the Vietnam War, when troops are being withdrawn. John Goodman plays the head of a fringe government agency who gets funding for an expedition to this newly found Skull Island to see what's going on there, essentially. He and his team of scientists hire a tracker, played by Tom Hiddleston, and a war photographer, played by Brie Larson. And they also require a military transport, which is headed up by Sam Jackson, who is I don't know if he's a general, I can't remember, a lieutenant something, he's in charge.
You are going to tell me everything I don't know, or I'm going to blow your head off.
Monsters exist. Yesterday I was a crackpot. But today?
You dropped those charges to flush something out. Who are you?
And Jackson's character is actually happy to be along for this mission. He wants to do one more thing before he gets pulled out. He's upset that his men are being pulled out of Nam. He thinks that they gave up on the war, essentially, and he didn't get to finish things sufficiently. And he and the Larson, the photographer character, have some friction as he thinks people like her taking photos of the horrors of war swayed the public sentiment away from their ultimate goal. I guess the ultimate goal is winning the war. So, horrors of war are one thing, then you have the horrors of Skull Island. Their initial assault on the island does not go well, of course, as Kong is very protective of it, and he's a large obstacle to get through.
Kong's God on the island, but the devils live below us.
And as happens with all the King Kong movies, we come to find that there are native people living on the island, and they worship Kong as a god, essentially. And he is protecting them, as a god might do, from the giant lizard creatures that live underground. And among these native people, we also meet John C. Reilly's character, who's a World War II veteran whose plane was shot down years and years ago. And he's been forced to live with them ever since.
Whoa. Your friend there can put that down.
So John C. Reilly, I would say, really steals the movie acting-wise. His performance is very funny and sad at the same time, I guess, as he's kind of lost his mind a bit over the years, not seeing or interacting with any other people from what you would call normal society. And the native people don't even hardly talk at all. They have a kind of silent language. And once he shows up on the scene, he really becomes the most interesting character in the film, without question in my mind. Performance-wise, I also really enjoyed Shea Whigham, who's an actor from a show I liked, Boardwalk Empire. Recognized him from that. He is in a supporting role as one of the soldiers. He does a really good job, I thought.
He surrendered right after we leveled his village. He was 50 years old, said he never even seen a gun until we showed up. Sometimes an enemy doesn't exist till you go looking for one.
What happens when they show up on your doorstep?
I'll still have his gun.
And Jackson gives his typical type of performance. He kind of ends up being the more of the obstacle than King Kong and other creatures.
I'm not leaving Jack out there. Now, who's with me?
We can make it.
You're mighty right we can make it. Now, stay sharp. Keep an eye out.
I've only been here 28 years. What do I know?
Other performances The Larson and Hiddleston characters were kind of flat for me. They don't have all that much to do, and they're pretty one note. So I would say that's a bit of an issue with the film. They are kind of set up as the two kind of leads, especially toward the end, but they don't really experience any type of character arc, so that would be a flaw. And what about Kong himself, the ultimate character of the movie, you would think? I guess I'll go with some mild spoilers here. This Kong film does not end up with him leaving the island as he does in a lot of the other ones, going to New York or something. His whole story is really just continuing to protect the island from these skull crawlers, those lizard creatures, and be the god, essentially, on the island. He does protect the Larson character in one scene toward the end, but he doesn't really form any too special a relationship with her or anyone else, really. But it does appear that he can, I guess, differentiate between people, as he doesn't really blame her or Hiddleston's character for what Jackson and his soldiers are doing, trying to kill him with napalm explosions and everything. Speaking of that, the film does make some pretty, I would say, overt references to Apocalypse Now, loving the smell of napalm in the morning. The Vietnam setting and the way that some people lose their mind in war or in absence of war, and the relative purposelessness of the Skull Island mission is definitely comparable to the ultimate pointlessness of that war in Vietnam. And the director of the film is Jordan Vogt Roberts, and I actually heard him on the Doug Loves Movies podcast this past week promoting the film. And he made several video game references when he was talking about it. And I'm not a big gamer myself. I didn't really get the references, but having seen the film, I will say that it does feel like a video game a bit. Some of these various Kong fight scenes play a little bit like cutscenes from a video game or something. And Vogt Roberts also kept saying that the film was weird, and there is little touches of that here and there. He might have oversold that a bit, but John C. Reilly brandishing a samurai sword on Skull Island is a weird touch. I'll give him that. The CGI is pretty good, not the best I've ever seen, but good enough for some giant kind of ape versus dinosaur battles. I did enjoy the cinematography as well. I think Vogt Roberts has a good eye for this sort of thing. The jungles of East Asia are obviously very photogenic. And I also enjoyed the various other giant creatures that pop up here and there on the island. So overall, I did enjoy Kong Skull Island, even though it didn't have the strongest characters for the most part. And I thought the final act was a touch underwhelming. But the Reilly performance is great. There's some decent action, and it's good looking. So for a summer blockbuster style film, even though it's mid-March, it does its job, though I doubt this is going to become any sort of classic or anything. I will say I did like it quite a bit better than the Peter Jackson Kong movie, which I felt was trying to do way too much. A simpler approach worked better here, in my opinion.
Get us the hell out of here!
Alright, so Kong Skull Island is set in the 1970s, but now let's turn to a film that was released in the 70s. The Island of Dr. Moreau from 1977, directed by Don Taylor and starring Burt Lancaster in the titular role.
How long have you been here?
11 years. It's truly amazing how the flesh reasserts itself.
The main protagonist is portrayed by young Michael York, who is best known to me for his roles in the Austin Powers movies as a Basil Exposition. So, just like our last Island film, this takes place in a previous time period. From what I could gather, it was around the turn of the century, I think. There's some allusion made to planes not quite being invented yet, but they're working on it. And I guess the novel by H.G. Wells that this is adapting was published in the late 1800s, so that could make sense. I'm not too familiar with the novel myself, having never read it, so I will be judging the story just as this film tells it.
You have books here. Oh, you're a reader, are you?
And it's a pretty straightforward story. York's character, Braddock, washes up on this mysterious island after being adrift at sea for a long stretch. He nurses back to health under the care of Dr. Moreau and is essentially compelled to join the doctor and his people on the island, as there's no easy way to leave anyway. The doctor has a hired gun type of guy working for him. He also has a young woman that he apparently rescued when she was a girl from a bad situation, and has some other servants as well that are pretty strange looking. I wonder why.
You say there are all kinds of animals on this island. Well, what kinds exactly?
I'm going to strike a bargain with you, Mr. Braddock. When you require a drink, my quarters are next to the gate. When it comes to questions, you save them for Dr. Moreau.
If you're familiar with the story, you will know what the good doctor is really up to on his island. He's a bit of a mad scientist type, taking animals like tigers and bears, etc., and attempting to turn them into humans. He basically wants to emulate King Kong in the sense that he wants to play God, like Kong does on his own island, though in this case it's more in the sense of creation and then dominance over your creation than any sort of benevolent attempt to balance nature. And Moreau is subverting the natural order of things, and in doing so causing a lot of problems and moral quandaries that Braddock has to deal with.
Is the hand that hurts. Is the hand that heals. Is the house of pain.
So, the protagonist comes to find that most of these humanoid creatures that have been created live in a cave on the island and have varying degrees of animalistic tendencies still. And we learn that the doc has taught them 3 main principles on how they need to live.
What is the law? Not to walk on all fours. Are we not men? What is the law? Not to eat flesh. That is the law. Not to shed blood. That is the law.
What is the law? Not to walk on all fours, not to hunt man, not to shed blood. Then the climax of the film revolves around the breaking down of these principles when the creatures discover that their creator does not necessarily practice what he preaches. And his decisions are, of course, somewhat spurred on by the actions Braddock takes, especially when he's plotting an escape from the island with Moreau's pseudo-daughter. I will say that the plot line is pretty predictable. There were no real surprises for me. The actors all deliver capable performances, though York is a touch melodramatic at times.
Well, those creatures, what are they?
Well, how many were there?
Well, 2, 3, maybe 4. I don't know. What in God's name was...
Control yourself, Mr. Braddock. We better have a look around. You go back to the compound, that way.
What were they?
The film is not particularly great to look at least in terms of cinematography with the jungle setting and everything. It does have that 70s kind of grainy look. The makeup for the creatures is pretty good, I would say. They do look appropriately grotesque. And if you think about it, this film was released in the same year as Star Wars, which is a classic example of kind of makeup for various creatures, but it's not too far off the mark. So the most interesting aspect of the film, though, I would say, at least in terms of how it was shot, was they appeared to film with live animals, and dangerous ones at that. There are several scenes involving tigers and then other jungle cats chasing after or fighting with the human actors, or stunt people, I presume. Even when when this was filmed, I do question whether these animals were treated properly or humanely, especially a scene where a horse gets taken down. I also wonder how many or if any people were injured during the filming. You know, perhaps it's something I could have looked up before doing this review, but in any event, it is interesting from the perspective that one would never see something like this in a modern film. But ultimately, you know, pondering these questions about the animals, or that being the most interesting part to me, will kind of tell you that this film isn't great or anything. I thought it was diverting for a watch, and I'd never seen any of the other Island of Dr. Moreau movies, or, like I said, read the book, so I was interested to do this, but, you know, it kind of was what I expected. So if you are a fan of the book, I would think you'd probably want to give this a watch to see how it stacks up. But as far as island movies or creature movies go, or a combination of that, it's not the best one around. So that's going to do it for this episode of Drew's Reviews on my Creature Island films, and I will be back soon for another episode where I tackle 2 other films. Thank you for watching, and peace.
I never said that name out loud before. It sounds stupid now that I say it. Just, you call him whatever you want.